Hello there, and welcome to Educalme Classroom. We are so excited that you're here. We just want to take a second to say how much we appreciate you and how inspired we are by your commitment to your students and the change that you're making in the world. Now, this video is to help you get started with Educalme Classroom with success so that you're getting the most out of this program and seeing the best results in your classroom. So this is your Educalme Classroom success plan. On this video, we're going to talk about what is mindfulness so that we're all on the same page of what is it that we're really teaching here. And then next, we're going to talk about how does mindfulness support students. Now, you might already know that mindfulness is going to support your students, but if you really understand the why behind this, it's really going to help you to make the most out of this subscription and to see the biggest results in your classroom. Then we're going to get into exactly how to use Educalme Classroom. And finally, you're going to create your Educalme Classroom success plan. So by the end of this video, you're going to be completely ready, completely confident starting your Educalme Classroom practice in your classroom with your students. So let's get started. All right, so what is mindfulness really? Mindfulness is simply paying attention to the present moment on purpose. It's choosing where you're placing your attention. Now, our amazing human brains are so powerful. We're able to imagine the past. We're able to really experience the present, and we're able to imagine and plan for what might happen in the future. Now, this is such an amazing quality. The only thing that can pose problems is that when we are imagining the past, oftentimes we're thinking of things that might have gone wrong or that we wish had gone differently or something that was difficult in our life. Our brain loves problems and it really loves trying to solve problems. So it's often going to look for problems and go over things in our mind. Now, as we are imagining the past, our body actually doesn't know the difference between what's real and what our brain is imagining. So when we're imagining something that was stressful or something from the future that's coming up that might be stressful and we're thinking of the worst case scenario and how we might solve those problems, our body actually doesn't know that it's just in our imagination. It believes that we're truly there and it actually starts to put those stress hormones into our body. Now, when we are thinking of stressful things and those stress hormones are in our body, it actually makes learning really hard. It takes our brain out of a state that makes it ready to learn. And of course, when we're living a large portion of our life thinking about the past or the future and our body is getting pumped with those stress hormones, that isn't good for our body's health either. Puts a lot of stress on our organs. So if we can practice with mindfulness, coming back to the present moment, noticing when we're getting stuck in the past, noticing when we're really thinking of the future, and come back to what's truly happening right now, we get to appreciate life more. We get to enjoy our life more because usually what's happening in this present moment tends to be pretty good. But like I said, because our brain likes to find problems that it can solve, it's going to look for those problems unless we train it to come back to the present moment. So that's what we're doing with mindfulness. Now, in our classroom, if we can teach our students how to notice when they're stuck in their imagination of the past or the future and to come into the present moment, that's what's going to really make them ready to learn. So when they can notice when they're off daydreaming and then pull themselves back, that means they're going to be more focused on the lesson. That means they're going to be more involved in the learning. That means they're going to get to experience these awesome things you're doing in your classroom with them at a deeper level. So when we're teaching mindfulness, we're training our brains to pay attention to the present moment on purpose. It's like building a muscle. We're actually wiring our brain to become more able to stay in the present moment for longer periods of time. Now, in order to teach mindfulness and to create these neural connections, these neural pathways that we need to be able to pay attention to the present moment on purpose, there's two different sides of our practice. So the first side is the formal practice. So that's when we're practicing mindfulness explicitly, and you're going to be using Educalme Classroom audio and videos to explicitly practice with your students. So I really like to liken mindfulness to learning to read. Mindfulness is a skill. That skill is going to help us in many areas of our lives. Reading is also a skill that's going to help us in many areas of our lives. Now, when we're teaching a child to read, we can't just do it here and there. We really need to sit down with them and formally teach them the skills so that at one point they're going to be able to take that practice of reading books into reading instructions on the board on their own, reading the cereal box, reading a menu, and taking those awesome skills that they learned from reading in the formal practice informally into their life and applying it whenever they need it. So the same is true with mindfulness. In our formal practice using Educalme Classroom audio and videos, your students are going to learn skills that they can use. They're going to learn how to recognize what their brain is up to, what they're thinking about, and guide their thoughts and their attention back to the present moment. They're also going to learn things like breathing strategies that are going to help them to deal with their big emotions. Now, as they're practicing this every day in the Educalme Classroom practice, they're going to start gaining skills that then they can take into their lives. So applying that breathing strategy when they're feeling stressed out before a test, or applying that breathing strategy when they're in an argument to help them to cool down. So the goal here is to formally teach the skills so that it can get integrated into their lives. And then really what we're doing is living our lives to the fullest and living mindfully. So let's talk a little bit more about how mindfulness is really supporting our students. When we know the why behind mindfulness, it can really help us to keep going even in the moments where we haven't seen progress yet. So the benefits of practicing mindfulness in your classroom is it's an exercise for the brain. So we exercise our bodies. Our students go to phys ed and they work on their muscles. They work on their physical conditioning. Very important for a healthy body. The same is true for the brain. When we're sitting and doing the mindfulness practice, students are actually building neural pathways that are good for the brain. They're really building that muscle in the brain. Another great thing about mindfulness is that it lowers stress and anxiety. So as students learn how to recognize their emotions and they learn breathing strategies that they can use to calm themselves down when they're feeling stress and anxiety, it really helps them to learn. So when our students come into the classroom and they're feeling stress or anxiety, their brain is shut off. They are physically not capable of learning because when there's stress hormones in the body, those hormones are telling the body that something really dangerous is coming and we have to be on high alert. So the brain gets hyper-focused on the problem and really just isn't in a state where it's ready to learn new things. So when our students come into our classroom, we don't know what kind of morning they had or what kind of recess they had, and they experience those big, big emotions. So when we can start the day, start the class with mindfulness, we're reducing those stress hormones and getting the brain ready to learn. So that brings us to the next point. It's preparing the brain to learn, and it's actually exercising the brain so it can get even better at learning. So I like to think of this as kind of like a warm-up before learning. We start with mindfulness, get the brain in the state that it needs to be in to be ready to learn, and then we start the learning. Mindfulness develops attention. So when we're getting our students to sit quietly and pay attention to what's happening in the present moment, that's actually a pretty boring thing to do. So oftentimes we're asking our students to pay attention to how their feet feel or how their heart feels. Now, Our brain is so used to, in this day and age, getting tons of information coming at us really quickly in a really interesting way. When we're teaching our students to sit still, pay attention to these tiny little things, the brain gets better at and learns how to pay attention to one thing at a time for longer periods of time, which is so useful for learning. Next, mindfulness improves memory. So when we're lowering that stress and anxiety, when we're preparing the brain to learn, it's first of all going to allow the brain to create new memories. Now, in addition, when we're stressed and feeling anxious, it's really hard for our brain to access memories that we've already created. So when we start the class feeling calm, it allows the brain to access that thing that they learned yesterday or the day before or the week before and build on those learning. Mindfulness increases focus. So it helps the brain of our students learn to pay attention to one thing at a time for longer periods of time. And of course, to recognize when we're starting to think of other things and then come back to focusing on what we're supposed to be doing. Mindfulness increases self-awareness, so it gives students the chance to get to know themselves better, to understand themselves and their own needs. Oftentimes we fly through our day and we don't even pay attention to, when we're hungry or when we have to go to the washroom. We sort of push those things away and we don't always take good care of ourselves. So this is teaching our students to recognize what their body needs, what emotions they're feeling, so that they can make good choices for themselves. Then, once they are able to recognize what they need, then they're also going to learn the strategies during mindfulness to regulate their emotions, to regulate themselves. So they're going to have strategies for when things aren't going so well. They're going to know exactly what they need to do to get back to that calm, good feeling place. And that's always great too, the self-regulation piece, is because then you're spending less time helping your students to regulate, and they're more able to do it on their own. So you're not always having to step in to support everyone in the classroom. So these are lifelong skills that are going to support them throughout their lives. And next, mindfulness develops kindness and compassion towards themselves and others. As students really get to know themselves and recognize how emotions feel, and then how big emotions can sometimes get them to make choices that they wouldn't make when they were feeling calm. So sometimes we don't always make good choices, and that's just part of being a human. So when they start to recognize that, we can make mistakes, but we can fix those mistakes. We can say sorry. We can have compassion for ourselves and for others. Once they understand that about themselves, then they're better able to put themselves in the shoes of a peer. So if someone else in the class is having an off day and acting out a little bit, instead of that student getting really upset about their peer that's acting out, they can recognize, oh, my friend needs extra support today because they're having a hard time. It creates that piece of empathy. Now, of course, we're talking about mindfulness, how it's going to help us in the classroom, but there are so many more physical and mental well-being benefits that come from this practice. So now that you understand the why of the Educalme Classroom practice, let's get into how you're actually going to use Educalme Classroom in your classroom. So we're going to go through 5 steps together. If you'd like to grab a piece of paper to write down what you're going to be doing for each of these steps, feel free. You might also want to grab your schedule, because we're going to be going over your schedule today too. So if you want to pause the video and grab a pen and a paper and your schedule, go for it. Otherwise, let's keep going. So step 1 of the Educalme practice is an optional step. This really depends on your school culture and the culture of the community that you live in. So it's up to you to discern what needs to be done here. So step 1 would be communicating with parents. So it might be a good idea for you to send an email or a letter or just talk to the parents at parent teacher to explain what mindfulness is and why it's important for the classroom. Now, we have already written this letter for you to make it really easy, and it's in the Start Here section of Educalme Classroom. So feel free to take that letter, modify it as you would like. You can copy and paste it, up to you to use it however you would like. Now, as you're communicating with parents, the key thing to explain to them is that mindfulness is an exercise for the brain, and that with the mindfulness practice, it's getting the brain ready to learn. So, in today's day and age, as mindfulness is growing in popularity, sometimes parents are going to have questions like, oh, is this a religion or is this yoga? Or what is mindfulness exactly? Now, mindfulness is non-denominational. It is not a religious thing at all. It's simply an exercise for the brain. So, I really like to explain mindfulness like it's a sport. So, for example, the sport of football, okay? If anyone's playing the sport of football, that's just a sport. That's not a religion. But anyone that's playing the sport of football is welcome to bring their religion into it. So sometimes you might see teams that will pray before they start their game, or a player that might, raise their hands and say a little prayer to thank God that they were able to make a point. Now, that doesn't make the sport of football religious. That's just the freedom that everyone has to bring their religion or their spirituality into any practice of anything that they do. So some people that practice mindfulness will bring their religion or their spirituality into their mindfulness practice, and that's absolutely fine. Everyone is able to bring their beliefs into anything that they do. But mindfulness itself is just like football. It is an exercise for the brain. It gets the brain ready to learn. And when we're practicing this in schools, that is the route that we're taking. So this can be really helpful to explain to parents if they aren't quite clear on what mindfulness is. So for step 1, let's plan for success. So decide right now, are you going to communicate with parents? And if so, how? Are you going to write a letter? Are you going to email them? Are you going to just chat with them at parent-teacher to mention it? Really up to you to decide what is the best option for you in your situation, in your community. Now, step 2 of starting your Educalme practice with success is add mindfulness to your class schedule. Just like math, just like reading, just like anything else on the schedule, mindfulness needs to be scheduled in. Just like anything you teach in the classroom, routine, repetition, and practice are key. Now remember, mindfulness is a skill that we're teaching our students, that they are learning over time. This isn't something that they're going to get day and night after one practice. So again, we'll come back to learning to read. If we want our students to learn to read proficiently, we're not going to just invite an author into the classroom to read a book to them once. No. We're practicing with them every single day and building those skills over time, over days, weeks, months, and years. The learning never really ends. It's a skill that continues to be practiced, and the same is true with mindfulness. So adding it to our schedule so that it becomes a regular part of our daily routine is so important and so key. So plan for success. Add Educalme to your schedule. So a really great time to add Educalme to your schedule, if it works, is to do it first thing in the morning. So as I mentioned, you never know what your students are coming into your classroom with, what emotions they're feeling when they come in. So if you can start the class or start the day with an Educalme practice, this is going to help get their brain ready to learn and allow them to address whatever it is that's going on in their lives at the time. So if you're teaching in elementary school and you have the same students all day long, you might want to plan to have Educalme first thing in the morning. So maybe right after morning announcements, you do Educalme practice and then you move on with the rest of your day. If you don't see your students for the full day and you have different students coming into your classroom throughout the day, you might want to do the Educalme practice in the first 5 minutes of your block with those students. Again, starting the learning, warming the brain up and getting it ready to learn. Now, if you have your kids all day, you might even want to do the Educalme practice more than once in a day. Maybe you want to do it first thing in the morning, and maybe you want to do it again after lunch or after recess, so that again, you're getting the brain and the body back into a state where it's ready to learn. Now, there's no right or wrong time to put this into your schedule. The important thing is that you're as consistent as you can be so that the students know when it's coming, they can look forward to it, just like anything else on the schedule. Step 3 is to set your students up for success with clear expectations. Now, really important to remember that most of your students have never practiced mindfulness before. This is a fairly new practice and it's only recently becoming mainstream. So they're going to most likely have zero idea what mindfulness is or what it's supposed to look like. So it'll be up to you to decide and communicate with them how and where are we going to sit during the practice. Now, again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's up to you to decide what's going to be the best fit for you and your students, what is going to create the smoothest transition, what is going to be an easy way to make this routine. So you could have your students sitting cross-legged on the floor, maybe on the carpet, maybe in a circle, or maybe in assigned spots. They could just be sitting at their desks and sitting upright. One thing that's really great for younger students or any groups that have a hard time not chatting during the practice is actually to get them to lay on their bellies on the floor with their head down. So you can see that in the bottom photo here on this slide is a bunch of students who are sitting in a circle and they all have their head down. This really helps them to get into the practice without being nervous or self-conscious about the other students in the classroom, maybe looking at them if their eyes are closed. Next, another option is they could be laying on their backs on the floor. They could be at their desks, but with their head down. So again, kind of covering their face and covering their eyes so that they don't feel that awkwardness of, oh, maybe someone else is looking at me, or it might help them to not feel like the curiosity of looking around to see what everyone else is up to. And then are you going to assign spots, or are you going to give your students a choice? Can they just sit wherever they want in the classroom? Now, there's, again, no right or wrong choice here. What we want to do is set our students up for success. So in what way can you get your students to sit during this practice that's going to help them in the specific group that you have, you know them best? What is going to help them to really have success in this practice? Now, another thing to consider for your expectations are during a practice, what does it look like, sound like, and feel like? So generally a good place to start is that during the Educalme practice, it should look, so if someone were to just walk in the classroom randomly and see you and your students practicing, it should look like students are listening to the audio and following the instructions. Now, are students all going to have their eyes closed and be sitting completely still? No. They are not. And that's okay. It is okay if they're not sitting completely still. It's okay if they whisper from time to time. Because this is a daily practice that they're going to be doing for the whole year, think of the big picture. We definitely want to make sure that each practice is as successful as it can be, but without getting too nitpicky on the small details. So the look should be that they are following the instructions and listening to the audio. Now, how does it sound in the classroom? It should be quiet so that everyone can listen to the audio. Does that mean that no one's going to be tapping their foot or wiggling a little bit? You're definitely going to have that in your classroom. There's definitely going to be a little bit of movement, a little other sounds, and that is totally fine. It shouldn't be or it doesn't have to be so quiet that you can hear a pin drop, as long as everyone is able to hear the audio so that they can participate. Now, how should it feel? Well, this should be a really nice practice that feels calm and relaxing. It's really nice to tell the students that, this is their time to just relax. It's a time where they don't have to do any work. They don't have to, be on. They can just take this moment to themselves, these, 3 to 5 minutes to have some alone time with themselves. So plan for success. Decide now, what are the expectations going to be with your students? Now, I said here, decide on the expectations you'll start with, because throughout the full year, you'll definitely have to be flexible and try new things throughout the year. So starting with your initial expectations that you will clearly communicate with your students before getting started with this practice. And then you can start to change the expectations together with the class. So maybe after a couple weeks, your students, you think that if they were sitting at their desks in the beginning, maybe it'll be nice to try sitting on the carpet for a change and see how that goes. You can definitely do that. I recommend sticking with the same expectations and routine for a good amount of time until they have success with that routine, and then trying the next thing to switch it up a little bit and keep it interesting. Step 4 is to listen to the guided audios with your students. So it's really important that you demonstrate to your students how important this practice is, and that you demonstrate how to do the practice. Like I said, many of them have never done this before, so they're going to be looking to you for guidance on what it should look like, how you should be acting during this time, and really what mindfulness practice looks like. So very important for you to model the practice, doing it with them, to show that it's important for you too. And this is really modeling to them as well that mindfulness isn't just a practice for students. It's not a practice for kids. This is a practice that's lifelong. These are strategies that they're going to be using for their entire lives, and that you as an adult are benefiting from it too. And of course, this practice is so important for you too. Teaching is a stressful job, and taking this time to have a little bit of quiet with your students is so important for your well-being as well. Really important during this time to not be checking your emails or doing any other work, and to make sure that you're truly participating with your students. Your participation is also going to be giving you all the common language that you can use throughout the day to take the formal practice into the informal practice, where you're infusing your day with the breathing strategies that you've been learning together, and the vocabulary about emotions that you've been learning together. So a really great thing to do is, once, say, you've done the 5-finger breathing lesson, well, now you can, when your students have a lot of energy and you can tell that they're not ready to learn, you can start saying things to make that connection with them, like, hey guys, I see that you're having a really hard time focusing right now. It must be really hard to learn when you have lots of energy. What do you think we could do to get our brain ready to learn? And then together come up with a plan that, okay, let's try 5-finger breathing, or let's try balloon belly breathing. And this is going to remind them and really reinforce to them that mindfulness is a tool that they can bring into their lives whenever they need it. Now, in terms of structuring the practice into your routine, you'll notice that in Educalme Classroom, each unit has 5 audio recordings. There's a couple ways that you can use this, and it's up to you to figure out what works best for your age group and for your group of students. One way to do it is, and this works especially with younger kids, is to do audio number 1 for the whole week. So you're listening to the same audio throughout the whole week. With older kids, you might want to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You're doing a different audio per day. That's why there's 5 audios in there. And then repeating those same audios the next week. So each module should be used for about 4 to 5 weeks. That repetition is so key for the students. It's really important that they're hearing the same audios over and over to really integrate that learning. So let's plan for success. Where and how will you sit during the guided audios? So I want you to really be able to visualize in your mind on that first day that you're doing Educalme with your classroom, how is it going to look? Where are your students going to sit? Where are you going to sit? How is this going to look? That brings us to step 5. So in step 4, we're listening to the practice all together. And then in step 5, right after the practice, we're going to reflect on the practice to really deepen that learning and also have the chance to build community in your classroom. So there's a couple ways that you can do the reflection piece of the Educalme practice. One option is to do a sharing circle or a morning meeting after the practice. This is going to give your students the chance to vocalize what they're learning and for you to really see what they're taking away from this. So a really great question to ask at any time is, what did you notice during the practice today? Because that's what mindfulness is. It's paying attention to the present moment on purpose. So noticing what's going on. Now, when you ask this question, there's no right or wrong answer. You might have one student that says, I really loved that. I feel really calm now and I enjoyed it. And then your response can simply be, yeah, sometimes mindfulness helps us to feel calm. Thank you for sharing. Another student might say something like, I really didn't like that. It was really boring to sit still that whole time. And then you can say, yeah, sometimes sitting still can feel really boring and be really hard. Thank you for sharing. So any opinion is a correct opinion because their job is simply to recognize what is going on in the present moment. So if their emotions are telling them, ooh, I like this, that is valid. If their emotions are telling them, I don't like this, that's also valid. So your job here is to really support your students in what they're going through. Another option is using the student reflection booklets. So you'll see that in the lesson plan, we have question prompts for the sharing circle or morning meeting. But then in the printables section, we also have reflection booklets that you can print out and have your students reflect on the practice in writing or in drawing. So up to you to choose the version that's the correct level for your students and where they're at. And also up to you of how you want to use it. So do you want them to be reflecting in the booklet after every practice? Or do you want to do a sharing circle Monday to Thursday and then reflect in the booklet on the Friday? Lots of different variations that you can do here. Or maybe you have another idea, something else that you want to incorporate, a writing activity or a drawing activity or a discussion activity. Doesn't matter exactly what you do, it's about taking that couple minutes to reflect on what they heard and what they experienced during the audio. So let's plan for success. When you get started right off the bat, in that first week of practice, how will you reflect on the practice with your students? Are you going to start off with a morning meeting or a sharing circle, or are you going to start off using the booklets just so that so that you're able to visualize and plan for exactly how you're going to get started with this? Throughout the year, you'll definitely play with the discussion option versus the writing option and try a little bit of everything. That will be totally up to you to decide how you want to do it, but decide what you want to do right off the bat. All right, so we've gone through your Educalme Classroom plan for success. Step 1 was communicating with parents. So by now you should have decided if and how you're going to communicate with parents. Step 2 was adding Educalme to your daily schedule. So by now you should have taken your schedule and written on the schedule exactly where during your day you're going to be doing the Educalme practice. Step 3 is to create and communicate expectations. So you should have decided how you want your students to sit, where they're going to sit, and what the behavior expectations are during the practice, and how you're going to communicate that to your students. Step 4, listen to the guided audios with your students. So consider where it is that you're going to be sitting, what is that practice going to look like, and maybe even deciding if you're going to be doing lesson 1 for a full week, or doing lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 throughout the week and then repeating it for the next week, depending on your age group. Step 5 is to reflect on the practice. So by now you should have decided how that reflection is going to happen for the first week or month of the practice. Do you want to have the discussion with your students, or do you want them to be using the booklets, or do you have something else in mind? So now that we've gone over how this practice should go, what it should look like in the classroom, it's time for you to play and get creative. So now take some time to explore Educalme Classroom. Get in there, take a look around, and start to plan how you're going to be using this resource. So with Educalme Classroom, get started with the first unit, which is Introduction to Mindfulness. That unit, just like all units, will last you about 4 to 5 weeks, depending on how you're using it. So maybe you're listening to audio recording 1 for an entire week before moving on to audio recording 2. Or maybe if you have an older group, you're doing audio recording 1 on Monday, recording number 2 on Tuesday, and so forth, and then repeating that for about 4 weeks. But of course, you're the expert in your classroom, so feel free to shorten or lengthen that if it feels right for you. But it's really important that the students are getting at least a couple weeks of repetition, of rehearing the same audios. Now, once you've completed the Introduction to Mindfulness unit, you can go through the other units in any order you want. So as you explore the different units, take note of which units have themes that align with what you'll be teaching in your class this year, so that you really get this cross-curricular perspective where the mindfulness practice supports the themes that you're already teaching in your classroom. Plan the order in which you'll be teaching the units from Educalme Classroom so that you can make sure it aligns with the themes that you'll already be covering. And decide, how will you use the printables? Are you going to use all of the printables or just some of them? Are you going to use them just as a fun activity for the students, or are you going to use them in some sort of evaluating way? Totally up to you, but take the time to really explore. There's lots of content in there to support you, and decide how it can best serve you and your students in your classroom. All right, so there is your Educalme Classroom success plan. We are so excited that you are part of the Educalme Classroom community. We just want to say again that we appreciate you so much, and we are so proud of the work that you're doing in the world, the work that you're doing in your classroom with your students, and the changes you're making in the world. Be sure to connect with the community in the Educalme Classroom forum. If you have any questions, jump in there, see if anyone else has had the same question or is already talking about that subject. And you can always connect with us. If you want to ask us a question directly, just go to our website, educalme.com, and click on our Contact Us page, and you can contact us through there. Thank you so much. With calm and appreciation, have a great day.